The descent of Chapman's Peak goes from the 33.7 kilometer mark at the summit to about 38.2 kilometers down in Hout Bay, a total length of roughly 5 kilometers. I'm going to fast forward through the first 3.5 of those kilometers because there's really not too much to say here. It's at the bottom, in the final K, where it gets especially steep, and so that's where the important parts will come. That's not to say that what you're watching now is not important, because there is this real temptation, perhaps spurred on by the view and the amazing scenery and the fact that the gradient has changed from up to down, that you will charge down on into Hout Bay. My suggestion here is that if you feel good, you hold back. That feeling is often artificial, created by all the factors I just mentioned, and you can easily pound the energy out of your legs if you go too fast. It's therefore much better to be conservative here. Conservative to the point, I'd say, that whatever your goal pace is for the race should also be your target pace on these first 3 or so kilometers of the descent. In other words, if you plan to run 6 minutes a kilometer overall, then this is not the time to charge down at 5:20, but rather aim to run fairly close to 6. I realize this is quite conservative, but I think you're better off if you rein it in here and protect those legs, because come Constantia Nek, you'll be grateful. This section can also be exposed to the wind, and so just be mindful of that. But overall, it's not especially complex and just a gradual wind down towards Hout Bay. It's only once you arrive at the payment stations, with just over 1 kilometer to go to the bottom, that it starts to become even more important to manage your efforts. So here we are just after the pay station, and I'm going to slow it down to normal speed again, because this is a really important part of the race, because the road does get quite significantly steeper downhill. That steep section really begins on this concrete part of the road, and I apologize for the sudden camera shake. So this might only be about 1 kilometer of descent, but the reason it can be make or break is because if you let go too much here and go too quickly, it can have implications that you'll only really feel in about 7 or 8 kilometers when you suddenly find that you have empty legs in Constantia Nek. Again, that's not to say that the first 3 kilometers of the Chapman's descent can't see the same thing happen, as I said, but now that you've recovered from your exertions on the climb, and because the road suddenly drops down, it's very easy to get pulled along by gravity and other runners. In fact, I suspect that a lot of people who fail to achieve their target time, or who unfortunately have bad days, do so because of what happens in this 10 to 15 minute period, particularly this final 5 minutes. They may look back and identify Constantia Nek as the moment where they lost the pace, but it could equally be this section that cost them the leg strength for that climb. It does get to around 7 to 9% here, and at times it is that kind of steepness where you find yourself leaning backwards just to control your speed. That obviously puts great strain on your quads, and they'll talk to you later if you're not careful. So my advice here is the same as for the early part of the descent. If you feel like flying, don't. Rather lose a few seconds here and gain them back later. Also, try not to lean back too much because of that braking effect. The way to run this technically is to drop your hips lower, to try and sit down, so to speak, and then lean very slightly forward. And that brings you to the end of the descent of Chapman's Peak, hopefully feeling strong and ready for the next phase. That next phase is Constantia Nek, and we're going to jump ahead a few kilometers to have a look at that climb now. So now, having watched both the climb and the descent part of Chapman's Peak, you're probably almost irritated with me for saying the same thing over and over, and that's patience, control, slow down. But honestly, your legs will thank you, and therefore me, for that if you get it right on race day. And I can't stress enough that the biggest thing that can happen on Chapman's Peak, especially coming down into Hout Bay, is that you cost yourself time later on. You don't make time up. Obviously, if you're feeling fantastic, then at that point you need to make the decision that you're going to go for it and you're going to push on. But if you overdo that push, then you really, really will pay on Constantia Nek. So I think your mental approach, as I mentioned in the clip, should be to get yourself to the lower slopes of Constantia Nek, even to the top of Constantia Nek, and then say to yourself, that's where you're in a position to strike for home, not before. And if you get that right, take the view in, experience the iconic climb of Chapman's Peak, and then let the hard work come later on, not on that climb. Next time we'll have a look at Constantia Nek, which is probably the toughest climb in the race, either in the half or the ultra, to be honest, and I'll talk you through some of the key points about that.